You're listening to The Green Flag with your hosts, Lukas Wacker and Kyle Cushman.
Who bounced back the most in 2022? Well, let's find out. We have got our three nominees for both the driver and the team for this category as well. So without further ado, Kyle, I will lead it off this time because you led it off for the previous couple.
Bit of a curveball there. You got me ready to go.
You didn't see it coming. You didn't see it coming. But third place for the driver best bounce back award, I will be giving it to none other than Daniel Suarez. You know, Trackhouse had a decent inaugural year. You know, it was basically that head-to-head between 2311 and them, right? The new two teams that came in with the, you know, celebrity owners that really took the NASCAR world by storm in 2021. Suarez still finished 25th in the overall point standings that year. So not great. They had some reliability problems, but they also just didn't quite have that speed. But to get his first career Cup Series victory this year, to go, I think bounce back candidate for his career is probably a better way to honestly give this award to Daniel Suarez, because he's had quite the journey to get to this point where he is a solid driver that a team can count on to deliver results. And he was able to be very, very consistent this year, finished 10th in the point standings, and, you know, to get 13 top tens, that first career victory, lead quite a few laps, and get a couple stage wins as well. That is a very, very solid, you know, benchmark kind of year now for Daniel Suarez to now build off of and maybe get that multi-win year, or, you know, make it to that round of 8 and everything like that. He was very, very close, had, you know, obviously the steering problem at the Roval that, you know, just upended his entire championship hopes. But I don't think many people saw what Trackhouse did in general, but, you know, as much as the spotlight has been placed on Ross Chastain's incredible run to finish second in the championship, Daniel Suarez should not go without some praise as well. Very, very solid throughout the year, and just didn't quite have as much luck as maybe Ross Chastain did on some occasions. So Suarez finishes third for me on the best bounce back driver from a poor 2021 statistically wise. But Suarez definitely proved a lot of people wrong, I think, this year, when, you know, he probably still had some doubters at the end of 2021 too. So Suarez gets a nomination for me for third.
Yep, he's in third for me as well for a lot of those same reasons. I think you can make an argument for him to move from bounce back to higher, but even the differences of bounce back versus breakout and that kind of stuff. I could hear an argument moving over to breakout. I put him in bounce back because we've seen him be successful in the past. Yeah. Of course, that being at lower series and stuff like that. But we've also seen him have consistent results for good teams and stuff like that. And he finally bounced back in a big way after spending a couple years at a lower team, and then a Trackhouse team that looked like they were going to be kind of a 20th to 25th place team for a lot of time, and broke out in a big way this year. And I think for a lot of those same reasons, Daniel Suarez is deserving of a shout for best bounce back. I'll jump to number 2 here because we got the same number 3. And this was a tough one. I had 2 guys pretty clearly for myself, 1 and 2. But figuring out which one would be 1 and which one would be number 2 was pretty difficult. I ended up going with Joey Logano, number 2 for myself.
Wow.
Going from 1 win in 2021 to 4 wins in 2022, going from an 8th place championship finish to winning the championship. I think it's important to remember the parity of the Cup Series this year when looking at things like overall top 10s, average finish, stuff like that, because en masse that dropped for a lot of drivers. We didn't see that dominant season from anybody. No. And for that reason, seeing the wins quadruple, see these top 5s go up by 1, even if the top 10s dropped slightly, even if the average finish dropped slightly, all that kind of stuff. I think Joey Logano bounced back in a big way from being a guy who was good playoff guy, could challenge for wins, consistent top 10s, to finding that championship form once again. So Joey Logano was a tough one for myself, debating whether he should win this award or finish second. Ultimately, he's the number 2 finisher for myself.
Not bad. Logano didn't crack my list.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's surprising.
I don't know if I necessarily considered him a bounce back kind of candidate in a lot of ways, because I feel like Logano's just always been there in a lot of conversations. As much as he didn't win races last year, I felt like, he was there in late race hunts and whatever. But I had a hunch going into Phoenix that he was going to win the championship, and he proved me right, at least. So that was kind of unfortunate that he did that. But nonetheless, for my second place, I went with an IndyCar guy here.
Ooh.
Felix Rosenqvist.
Okay.
He finished 21st in the point standings in 2021. He missed a race, obviously, due to the injury that he suffered there in Detroit. So that obviously doesn't help in terms of accumulating points. But when you look at what he was able to accomplish this year up against his teammate in Pato O'Ward that we all really love, we all think he has a great ceiling to him. It's just a matter of maybe finding that little bit more consistency. And also McLaren is fairly new to the IndyCar scene, and the fact that they're still competing against the likes of Andretti and Penske and Chip Ganassi is still very, very good for that team. But Rosenqvist to finish 8th in the point standings, off by some ways compared to his teammate, but nonetheless, he was able to get a couple pole awards this year, get quite a few top 10s, and just be there as a good foundation for that team. I mean, going into this last year, a lot of people thought, was he going to get kicked out of that seat? Because he was kicked
out of that seat this year at midseason and ended up keeping it. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah. So I got to give it to him for having the resilience to keep that seat and now stay with that team beyond now this year, going into next year, getting that third seat now with Alexander Rossi coming over. He solidified himself. And when you look at it, McLaren's got 7th, 8th, and 9th in the point standings that finished this year as their driver lineup. So that's pretty consistent across the board. You're hoping that they can maybe move up a row, maybe even 2 on their website to getting up in that championship conversation once the year is done. But Rosenqvist definitely deserves a shot. People were very high on him when he was in the 10 car for Chip Ganassi. Then he made the switch over to this team and did not quite have the speed that we were all expecting him to have right out of the gate. But I think he started to find that now this past year. So Rosenqvist doesn't quite get it, but I definitely think that he had a very impressive year that, people may overlook.
Yeah, that's a great shout. And he was actually the one I was considering at number 3 with Daniel Suarez. I gave Suarez the edge just because it's kind of similar, where teammate was a bit more successful in terms of wins and finish and stuff like that. But I gave the edge to Suarez just because he did pick up that win. But yeah, Rosenqvist, excellent shout in terms of the bounce back. And if it wasn't, I ranked mine kind of based off of where they ended up finishing as well in terms of the bounce back and like how big of the bounce back was. In terms of getting up there challenging for the championship and stuff like that. But if you're just strictly talking about driver who was here one season and completely ahead the next, Rosenqvist, I think you could make the argument that had the quote unquote biggest bounce back overall.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Number one.
I wonder if we have the same guy here.
I'm not sure. We'll find out in a second. Because mine is Will Power, biggest bounce back. Okay. Will Power went from a guy who I think a lot of people thought was kind of finished with Penske at the end of this upcoming contract to winning the damn championship. Super consistent this year. Just the one win, but consistently a top 5, top 3 threat week in, week out. That qualifying prowess really came through this season. And he went from somebody that had a lot of consistency issues last year, finishing 9th in the championship, and before that finishing 5th in the championship, being the number 2, number 3 guy at Penske, to bouncing back in a massive way to win the championship. So for myself, looking at the 2 championship winners there, and Logano, who bounced back with 4 wins versus 1, Will Power, who had the 1 win but had that consistency to win the championship from a guy that I think a lot of people were writing off as a championship contender. They were the toss-up for myself, and Power gets the edge for just strictly being a guy that I think a lot of people are starting to write off as a championship contender.
Absolutely. For all the reasons you just outlined, I think everybody thought he was basically done for his championship hopes, being that perennial race winning driver. I mean, he didn't have the race wins, like you pointed out, only had 1, but he went out there and beat Joseph Newgarden, who is probably a top 3 driver in that series. You could argue even number 1. He's a spectacular talent, but the fact that he was able to beat his own teammate in the same equipment, that was remarkable to watch. And after the last couple of years, I think a lot of people were writing Will Power off in terms of just not really mentioning him as much. Like, I don't think many people had him as the championship pick to start the year. But he proved a lot of people wrong that he is not done. And maybe we're seeing a little resurgence. Like, Scott Dixon hasn't had a resurgence, but these guys that get better with age, almost, it's like fine wine. Yeah, I'm not a wine guy, but like these guys are definitely proven that, age is just a number in a lot of ways. And Will Power went out there and proved a lot of people wrong. And he is easily, he was by far my bounce back candidate for winning this award this year. Like you said, 9th to 1st, a guy that nobody was really talking about, to being the guy that people were like, okay, when's it going to fall off? Mm-hmm. When's it going to drop off this season? Like, he can't keep this up.
People were lining up his replacements. Yep.
And he went out there and shut them all up. And that is very, very impressive in this day and age where youth is, king, it feels like, in motorsports. Mm-hmm. He went out there and proved that the veterans still have something to say about it in a very young IndyCar field when you look at the talent that's around him. So, yeah, Will Power, easily best bounce back driver in 2022.
All righty. Shall we get to the team side of things?
We shall indeed. We shall indeed. And you can lead off the team side for this one.
Why, thank you. And I'm interested to see your reaction to this one. Because for me, there was 2 very clear candidates for best bounce back in terms of the team front, but I wasn't quite sure who to have as the number 3. And this one is going just strictly off of the format of the championship in the series, and that is the NASCAR Cup Series.
Shocker.
Yeah. And because
as soon as I heard you say format, I'm like, oh, it's over.
Best bounce back team, Penske on the NASCAR side of things. Very similar in terms of success, in terms of wins, consistency, stuff like that. But last year in 2021, did not have anybody in the championship 4. This year, they ended up having the champion. And just looking at that big difference in terms of having some guys that were in the hunt last year versus this year, having a guy that obviously won the championship, but also Ryan Blaney there as well, who was quietly very consistent all season long. And definitely a candidate if things broke right for him in that Martinsville race. I think overall, just looking at that and just kind of the barometer of success, what success means in that series, it means making championship 4s and winning championships. That's what Penske broke through to do again in 2022. So I'll give them the nod for number 3 best bounce back on the team front.
Good shout. Only reason they weren't in my top 3 was because of Ryan Blaney not getting a win.
Yeah, that's fair to say.
For a guy that I'm exceptionally high on, I think that not getting a win this year is going to maybe slide under the radar, because at least he went on a little bit of a playoff run, very consistent. But for somebody that I think we both can agree on could be a future champion in this sport, to not get a win this year when almost everybody else, it felt like, did, is definitely a bit surprising. And for Cindric to get that first win in the first race of the year, I don't know if he was necessarily that impressive beyond that, but we haven't had many high expectations on rookies to begin with for quite some time. So that's fair to say. And Logano getting the championship is a very strong argument to make them into this category. For me, this next one is purely based off of standings finish. Going over to Formula E.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Venturi.
I was not expecting a Formula E shout from you, I'll be honest.
Venturi.
Okay.
They finished 7th in the standings in the 2020-2021 mixed combobulated season that was. This year, they were able to recover and finish 2nd in the overall championship. And to not be that far behind the Mercedes duo that won the championship in Stoffel Van Dorn, at least, is not too bad whatsoever for a team that had a very, very poor 2020-2021 season. So I got to give them at least a shout out. I thought they were deserving of a nomination purely based off of their points. I know they had more races this year, obviously, but to have 295 points this year compared to what they had in 2020-2021 and 146, not too shabby. So I got to give them some love as the 3rd nominee for this award.
Good stuff. To number 2 for me. And it's funny to say because the person that runs this team ended up getting fired or resigned or whatever you want to call it. Ferrari for me, number 2 best bounce back team.
Really?
Going from 3rd in the constructors to 2nd, but most importantly, having somebody that was the only one outside of Red Bull to even remotely challenge or be considered all season long for the championship. They went from the team that was pretty distant 3rd to the team that was at least the 2nd best.
They were the Mercedes of what this year was.
Yeah, exactly. To be the team this year that should have been a race win candidate behind Red Bull. And for that, this is a Ferrari team that for a couple of years now hasn't really been that. You expect them to win races, expect them to be at the front of the grid. The last couple of years, you've expected them to be the 3rd, 4th row, get some decent points, maybe grab a podium here or there when people falter. But no, the expectations changed this year. And sure, they maybe were disappointing in terms of what they were hoping to do this year based off of the car they had, strategy, the drivers, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, I think that they are deserving of a nomination for being a best bounce back just because of, I think it's important to remember where they came from in 2021 to where they were in 2022. So they get the 2nd nod for me.
Interesting. My 2nd place is Richard Childress Racing.
Oh my God, come on.
Yes, because they were able to win races this year as a legit speed threat. They didn't fluke into, Austin Dillon fluked into his win, but Tyler Reddick was able to take that car and win 3 races for his first 3 wins of his Cup Series career. Was a guy that I picked to win the championship to start the playoffs because I think we all thought that he could go on a deep playoff run with how the races lined up. And they had legitimate speed that they showed throughout the year, had some very bad luck in the playoffs that just did not result in them having a deep run whatsoever. But nonetheless, Tyler Reddick getting 3 wins, tied for 3rd most in the Cup Series this year, is very, very impressive for a team that has been nowhere on the radar for a lot of years. And they were able to get free agent Kyle Busch going into 2023 to be able to convince a guy like that this is a team on the upward trajectory. There's no other reason why he would go there than beyond believing in that team because he had
other options.
I mean, he had other options. We all know what the option was. He decided to go with a longer. You don't think 23XI Racing is a good option?
Was that a legitimate option?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Think so?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so. But from whatever I heard in the garage area, you know what I mean? But no, but I think that was a legitimate option. And RCR was the team that he placed that bet on. And I think that they were able to prove that they could win races this year. They're at least one of those teams that was able to win races. There are some teams that weren't able to do that as much this season. And that's, I think, a kudos to them that they are able to get a top free agent like that, a 2-time Cup Series champion, but also, help the growth and development of a guy like Tyler Reddick in a year like this, that he's going over to 23XI. Confidence probably sky high after a year that he's had, is very, very impressive. They didn't get a guy in the top 10 in points, but I think if they had a little bit of better circumstances, they had enough speed in a lot of races where that could have been an option for them to at least be up there challenging deeper into the playoffs than what they were. So I think they deserve 2nd as a bounce back, considering a lot of people had written this team off as a mid-pack kind of team. I think they're back up a little bit on the rise, at least when you look at what they were able to do this year. And now the expectations that come with signing a guy like Kyle Busch in 2023.
I think it's fair to say that from the win perspective, I think you're focusing a little too much on the off-track stuff because that hasn't come to fruition yet in terms of bouncing back. We got to see what they actually do with Kyle Busch first. Yeah. But at the end of the day, they still were a mid-pack team. They still didn't make it outside of the round of 16. They still didn't get anybody inside the top 10 in points, all that kind of stuff. Sure, they got the wins that are flashy and stuff like that. That's what you're striving for. But at the end of the day, it didn't result in any better success.
I mean, both of them missed the playoffs last year. So, I think for both of them to make the playoffs, I think, people had some higher expectations than what they ultimately did. Reddick missed the cut by 2 points. So it was, very touch and go there. And I think he would have moved into the round of 8 if he had got those 2 points based off of his win at Texas. So a lot of, what ifs and, ifs and buts and candy and nuts and everything like that. But I think that if just a couple other things just went their way, they could have been a team that was even more looked upon fondly after their 2022 season. No,
that's a great point there. All right, shall we get to our winner?
We shall indeed. I'm very curious to see who you have as your winner. But
really, because I think it's pretty slam dunk.
Okay, who do you got?
For me, the best bounce back team of 2022 is Penske on the IndyCar side of things. For me, this is a slam dunk pick. Looking at finishing 3 out of the top 4 positions in the IndyCar series, finishing 1st, 2nd, and 4th, picking up a bunch of wins, having the most consistent drivers over the course of the season. The only one that could touch them in the top 4 was Scott Dixon, who was Scott Dixon. And looking back to last year, which is the key, Joseph Newgarden finished 2nd, which he finished again this year. But looking down the grid, Simon Pagenaud finished 8th, Will Power finished 9th, and Scott McLaughlin was down in 14th. This is a team that bounced back in a massive, massive way. I think the move back to 3 cars instead of the 4 really helped them in terms of really focusing on those 3. And it paid dividends because all 3 were legitimate championship contenders. All 3 could have won the championship in that final race if things broke right for them. And finishing 3 out of the top 4 positions in as competitive a series as IndyCar is, after having won in the top 7 or 8 or whatever it ended up being last year. For me, that's a pretty easy choice for best bounce back team.
Interesting. I have Ferrari as my winner for the best bounce back. I almost wanted to take into account what 2020 was for that team, for this team going into this year too, because they were a long ways off not that long ago, and they have played their cards right in a lot of ways to be able to build a car that is race winning and the second best car on the grid in 2022. When they opened up the season there with that 1-2 finish in Bahrain, everybody was on it. Everybody was on the red train thinking that this is it. This is the year that we see Ferrari really, really sink their teeth into a championship battle. And then they ran into Max Verstappen. And that was something that a lot of people probably didn't expect it to run away the way he did. But to still win the second place battle against Sergio Perez in a lesser car is not too bad. They have made a lot of blemishes. Their drivers made some mistakes as well. But I'm looking at the team that they were able to build a car that had some reliability issues, sure, but they also built a car that was incredibly fast on qualifying speed. They gave their drivers a shot to win, and that was the second team that really can say that this year, except for Mercedes in the final couple of weeks of the season. So I give them a lot of credit on that in a competitive series where Mercedes and Red Bull have kind of been the top 2 for the last couple of seasons, at least. Ferrari came back with a vengeance, and I think they're in a pretty good spot here moving forward with the cost cap kind of penalty that Red Bull's been given with the wind tunnel time as well. I don't know how much of a major impact that will have, but I think it will, have some sort of advantage given to Ferrari that they're going to have a little bit more wind tunnel time than them to begin with. And then on top of the penalty, they're in a good position here to set themselves up for a good generation of this car. It's just a matter of honing in on making sure that power unit doesn't explode. It felt like almost every week. And then, the drivers have to just get a little bit better too. I'm sure that Leclerc and Sainz can agree on that, but for the car itself that the team is able to bring to the track and win the first race of the year and be very close in the second race, and winning races, Sainz getting his first win, at least he was able to manage that. Leclerc getting a couple wins here and there. Just about that reliability, I think that really prevented them from having a huge challenge this year. So I'm sure that that's their main focus in the off season. But for me, this was an easy slam dunk for me that they got the best bounce back.
Good stuff. Alrighty. Hey, we agree on 2 of the 3. That's all that matters.
I'll take it. At least. But
good stuff. And hey, I will say that you changed my mind a little bit on the RCR front. So
thank you.
There you go.
It's gotta be the jacket. I think
it is. It's tough.
You can't take me seriously in this thing. You can't not take me seriously. But for Kyle, it will be Team Penske with the IndyCar team winning the best bounce back. And then for myself, it'll be Ferrari for the best team bounce back. But then we both agree on Will Power being the best bounce back driver in 2022. No debate on that. Your IndyCar champion this year definitely is deserving of that award.